Caleb Turner wasn't the rebellious type, at least not until that Friday morning when the flatbed truck rolled up his driveway at 6:47 a.m. sharp, carrying a load of hand-cut cedar planks and exactly 12 concrete fence posts. He built the whole thing in a single day, sun up to sundown, not because he was in a rush, but because he didn't want to deal with questions, especially not from the homeowners association. The neighborhood of Evergreen Meadows prided itself on order. Fences were permitted, but only in one approved style: 4-foot vinyl, beige, no embellishments. But Caleb's fence, it stood 6 feet tall, rich with the scent of raw cedar, capped with black iron accents. Rustic, bold, beautiful, and completely unapproved. To be fair, he hadn't meant to start a war. The fence served a purpose. 1. It kept his Ram Muffin from charging mail trucks. 2. It gave Caleb the sense of privacy he hadn't had since moving in. He liked his peace, and he liked Muffin. He didn't think it would cause a problem. Not immediately. But that illusion shattered by dusk. As the final nail was driven into the last plank, and Caleb stepped back to admire his work, he noticed a figure watching from across the street. A tall, thin man in a slate gray blazer and khakis, clutching a clipboard like it was a weapon. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just stared. Later that evening, just as the sky turned orange and the cicadas began their nightly song, Caleb heard the doorbell. 3 knocks followed. Then silence. He opened the door. There stood the man from across the street, now on his porch. Up close, he looked like someone who never wrinkled. His hair was precisely parted, his shoes spotless. Gregory Darnell, the man said, without introducing himself further, president of the Evergreen Meadows Homeowners Association. Caleb gave a slow nod. Evening. Gregory didn't return the greeting. His eyes were fixed on the newly erected fence. That structure, he began, gesturing as if it were a corpse, is not in compliance with Article 5. Section B of the Evergreen Meadows Covenant Agreement. Caleb leaned on the doorframe. You memorized that? I wrote it, Gregory replied, as though confessing authorship of a constitution. All fence designs must be pre-approved by the HOA Architectural Review Committee, which, incidentally, I chair. Caleb shrugged. I didn't see anything in the bylaws about livestock fencing. Gregory blinked. Livestock? Yep, Ram. Name's Muffin. Lives out back. There was a beat of silence. It stretched uncomfortably long. Gregory cleared his throat. Regardless of animal occupancy, the height, color, and materials of your fence violate HOA standards. You'll receive formal notice tomorrow. You have 10 days to remove it. With that, he turned on his heel and walked away without waiting for a reply. Caleb closed the door slowly. 10 days, he scoffed. He hadn't even finished staining the thing. No way he was tearing it down. From the backyard came a low, gravelly snort. Muffin was watching the fence, head low, nostrils flaring, hooves scraping against the soil like he was preparing for something. Caleb looked out the window, then back at Muffin. You and me both, buddy, he muttered. Somewhere across the street, a curtain twitched. Gregory Darnell was still watching, and the war had just begun. By Monday morning, the letter had arrived. Cream-colored envelope, embossed HOA seal, typewritten text that smelled faintly of superiority. Caleb unfolded it at the kitchen table while sipping black coffee and watching Muffin munch on weeds through the back window. The letter read like a legal document, but with more passive-aggressive energy than a divorce decree. Gregory Darnell, it seemed, had wasted no time escalating the situation. Non-compliant fencing structure, it stated in bold. Immediate action required. Then came a list of violations so specific it was borderline satire. Unauthorized use of ornamental caps, wood grain inconsistency, and the most baffling of all, visual obstruction, exceeding acceptable harmony levels. Caleb let out a low whistle. Visual obstruction, huh? Muffin snorted like he agreed. 10 days to tear it down, or face fines starting at $50 per day, increasing every 72 hours. The HOA took its fences seriously. almost disturbingly so. Later that afternoon, as if summoned by the HOA gods themselves, Gregory reappeared. Caleb was adjusting the post hinges when he spotted the familiar khakis and clipboard approaching from the sidewalk, like a walking Yelp review come to life. Gregory didn't knock this time. He simply stood in the driveway and cleared his throat. Caleb looked up. "You lost, or just circling your prey?" Gregory smiled thinly. "Just following up. Thought I'd save you a trip to the mailbox." "I already got the love letter," Caleb replied, dusting his hands on his jeans. "Very romantic." The HOA president ignored the sarcasm. His eyes were scanning the fence, calculating angles, as if trying to see it not as a barrier, but a battlefield. "Let me be clear," Gregory said, his voice like static from a radio tuned slightly wrong. "This isn't personal, but rules are rules. Our community has standards, Mr. Turner." Caleb leaned against a post. Standards or control? Gregory blinked once, slowly, as if considering whether the question warranted a response. "We enforce harmony, uniformity. That's how Evergreen Meadows maintains its property value. I didn't realize cedar fencing could crash an economy." Caleb deadpanned. Gregory stepped closer. "This is a neighborhood, not a farm." At that exact moment, a loud metallic clang echoed from the backyard. Something heavy hit the fence. Both men turned as another clang rang out, louder this time. The cedar slats shook slightly. Gregory's brow furrowed. What was? "Probably Muffin," Caleb said casually. "He doesn't like eavesdropping." "Your coat?" "Ram," Caleb corrected. "He's very particular." A third clang, more forceful this time. Dust trickled from the top of the fence. Gregory took an involuntary step back. "Is that thing charging the fence?" he asked, eyes wide. Sometimes he does that when he's bored, or when people wear khakis. Gregory looked down at his pants. Another clang, followed by a loud, guttural BLAARGH. Gregory took another step back, one hand over his chest, like he was anticipating an incoming lawsuit. "You may want to put that creature under control," he said stiffly. "He's under control," Caleb replied, smiling faintly, behind a very sturdy fence. Gregory didn't respond. Instead, he scribbled something on his clipboard, turned sharply, and walked away at double pace. Caleb watched him retreat, then walked to the side yard and peeked over the fence. Muffin stood in the mud, steam rising from his nostrils, horns lowered, eyes locked on the driveway. "You're not subtle," Caleb muttered. Muffin sneezed and stomped. But as Caleb returned to the porch, something caught his eye. A drone, silently hovering in the air above his backyard. And it wasn't his. The drone buzzed like a mechanical wasp in the late afternoon sky, hovering just high enough to stay legal and just low enough to feel invasive. Caleb narrowed his eyes. It wasn't a toy. This thing had stability, camera gimbals, and a smooth precision that screamed Gregory. He watched it dip gently, aligning itself above his backyard, above Muffin. The ram didn't like it. His eyes followed it with suspicion, nostrils flaring. He let out a gruff huff and pawed the muddy ground, as if weighing whether it could be head-butted out of the sky. "I wouldn't," Caleb murmured from the deck. "The HOA probably has insurance." The drone zipped sideways, scanned the fence, and banked away, vanishing over the tree line like a spy fleeing the scene. Caleb didn't bother chasing it. He knew what it was doing. Surveillance. Gregory had crossed a line. The next morning, Caleb received a second letter, this one delivered by hand, slipped through the screen door like it was afraid of being touched. Inside was a list of additional violations. 1. Unregistered livestock. 2. Inadequate containment fencing. 3. Failure to comply with prior removal notice. 4. Potential threat to neighborhood safety. Caleb laughed out loud at that one. Muffin, a potential threat. Sure, he was territorial. Sure, he'd knocked a FedEx guy into the bushes once. But he was still a ram, not a wild bear. And yet, the HOA wasn't backing down. The fines were now escalating, $150 a day, with threats of legal action. Caleb tossed the letter on the kitchen table and sighed. This wasn't about safety. It was about control. That evening, while Caleb was hammering a second latch onto the side gate, something rustled by the sidewalk. He glanced up to see a different neighbor, an older man named Rob, who lived 2 houses down, lingering at the curb. Rob looked around nervously before stepping closer. Just so you know, they're talking about animal removal. Caleb straightened. What? Gregory's been going house to house, telling people your ram's a menace. Said he's talking to animal control. Said if you don't comply, the board might act without permission. Without permission? Caleb clenched his jaw. Thanks, Rob. Careful with that guy, Rob added. He tried to fine me last year for planting tomatoes. Caleb gave a humorless smile. Guess Muffin's not the only one who hates vegetables. Rob chuckled, but didn't laugh long. Just be ready. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, casting long shadows over the cedar slats, Caleb sat on the porch and stared at the fence. Beyond it, Muffin paced slowly, horns glinting in the twilight. He was agitated. He could feel the tension too. And that night, Caleb didn't sleep. He double-checked the latches, added a second lock, put his phone on loud, and just before midnight, while refilling Muffin's water trough, he saw it. Movement, behind the shrubs. A figure, briefly visible in the moonlight. It wasn't Gregory this time. It was someone else. Watching, measuring, possibly recording. Caleb ducked behind the shed and grabbed his flashlight, heart pounding. He swung the beam out. Nothing. Just trees, wind, and the soft snort of a very large ram now standing protectively between Caleb and the fence line. You feel that? Caleb whispered. Muffin gave a deep grunt in response, eyes locked on the darkness. Whatever was coming next, Caleb knew it wouldn't be in a letter. It would be personal. The next day was unusually quiet. Not a single passive-aggressive letter, no clipboard sightings, no drones. It made Caleb nervous. By 4 p.m., the sky had turned a gunmetal gray, and the wind carried the promise of rain. Caleb was tightening one of the fence latches when his phone buzzed. A neighbor, Sandy, from across the street, had sent a blurry photo. Message. Hey, you might want to check your backyard. This guy just walked past my house with a drone and a measuring wheel. Attached was the unmistakable outline of Gregory Darnell, looking very much like a man who had finally lost patience with due process. Caleb rushed around to the back. He wasn't ready for what he saw. Gregory was already inside his property line. Not on the porch, not on the driveway, inside the fenced backyard. How he'd gotten through the gate, Caleb didn't know. But there he was, clipboard in one hand, tape measure in the other, scowling as he inspected the base of the fence like a building inspector with a grudge. What the hell are you doing? Caleb barked from the deck. Gregory didn't flinch. I'm conducting an emergency visual inspection for safety compliance. In my backyard? You refused official inspections. That leaves us no choice but to proceed under Clause 17. In cases of potential endangerment, you're trespassing, Caleb snapped. There's no clause that lets you break into someone's yard with a drone and a fantasy. It's not breaking in, Gregory said, adjusting his glasses. The gate was unlatched. No, it wasn't. Caleb paused. Had he locked it? He was sure he had. Unless... His eyes flicked to the gate latch. The bottom bolt had been slid up, not down. The opposite of how he'd left it. Gregory had tampered with it. And worse, he didn't realize what else he just walked into. Because standing 15 feet away, behind a row of rhododendrons, was Muffin. The ram stood perfectly still, like a statue made of muscle and menace. His head was low, his hooves planted, ears back. Gregory, of course, hadn't noticed him. I'll be filing a secondary violation report, he announced, kneeling to measure the distance between 2 posts. This fence is more than 3 inches off alignment. Muffin moved, a slow, deliberate step forward. Caleb's voice dropped to a warning growl. Gregory. What? Gregory replied, brushing mud from his slacks. You need to leave. Now. Gregory turned, annoyed. Mr. Turner, I don't respond well to threats. Neither does Muffin. That got his attention. Gregory glanced toward the ram, just in time to see him charge. It was a blur, 200 pounds of wool and fury barreling through the garden with the force of a battering ram wrapped in fleece. Gregory didn't even scream. He just made a panicked oof as Muffin's skull hit him square in the chest. The clipboard went flying. The tape measure snapped back into its casing like a frightened turtle. Then came the squelch, as Gregory landed in the mud with a splash that echoed off the fence. Caleb winced. Muffin backed up, stomped twice, and let out a triumphant grunt before trotting off to resume his grazing like nothing happened. Gregory lay on his back, soaked, gasping, one shoe missing, glasses askew. You okay? Caleb called, not even trying to hide the smirk. Gregory raised a trembling hand. He assaulted me. He warned you. You trained that beast. He's not trained, Caleb said, stepping down the porch stairs. He's principled. A few neighbors had gathered by the fence line now, phones out, cameras rolling. And somewhere in the background, a slow clap began. Gregory, humiliated and drenched, groaned. He had no idea this was only the beginning. By the time Gregory Darnell squelched his way back through the gate, minus one shoe and every shred of dignity, 3 separate neighbors had already uploaded the footage online. One clip caught the moment Muffin lowered his head, another captured the full-bodied launch, and one slow-motion edit, complete with dramatic music, showed Gregory flailing midair before crash-landing in the mud like a knocked-over garden gnome. Within hours, the video hit 10,000 views. By morning, it had passed 2 million. Caleb woke up to find his phone buzzing nonstop. Texts, calls, emails, even a voicemail from a morning news station asking if he'd be willing to do an on-camera interview with the noble ram who stood up to HOA tyranny. He stared at the blinking notifications and shook his head in disbelief. Muffin, meanwhile, was completely unfazed. He stood in the backyard, chewing a mouthful of dandelions, now known to the internet as Muffin the Enforcer. Caleb's fence, once a source of local controversy, had become a symbol of resistance. A subreddit popped up overnight. People began posting their own HOA horror stories under the hashtag #MuffinJustice. One person even made a meme of Gregory flying through the air with the caption, HOA, harassment or airborne. The Evergreen Meadows HOA was not amused. By noon, Gregory had issued a formal statement through the HOA website, calling the incident a tragic misunderstanding and accusing Caleb of harboring a trained attack ram. He threatened further legal action. Caleb responded with a single sentence to the neighborhood newsletter. Muffin doesn't follow orders, he follows instincts. The HOA board scrambled to regain control. A special emergency meeting was called at the clubhouse, closed to the public. But that didn't stop people from gathering in the parking lot, holding signs like, "Let Muffin be free," "CEDA over control," "Make fences great again." Inside, the meeting turned chaotic. Several board members questioned Gregory's methods, particularly his decision to enter someone's backyard without notice. One even hinted at a motion to remove him as president. Caleb, for his part, stayed home and watched from his window. He wasn't gloating. Okay, maybe just a little. The victory felt surreal. What began as a simple fence had become a movement. He received letters of support from people across the country. Someone even sent Muffin a box of organic alfalfa treats with a handwritten note that read, "For the hero we didn't know we needed." But not everyone was celebrating. Gregory wasn't done. The next morning, Caleb found a new envelope. This one stamped urgent. Legal notice. Inside was a formal complaint filed with the County Animal Control Division. It accused Muffin of being dangerously aggressive, a hazard to community safety, and a recurring source of trauma for HOA officials. Caleb laughed out loud at that one. But the letter ended with something serious, a notice of pending livestock removal. Muffin could be taken from him. And just like that, the laughter died in Caleb's throat. This wasn't about fines or fences anymore. Gregory was coming for his animal, his friend. Caleb clenched the letter in his fist, His heart thudded in his chest. If the HOA wanted a war, they were about to get one. And this time, Muffin wasn't the only one with horns. The letter trembled in Caleb's hands, but not from fear, from fury. They wanted to take Muffin. Forget fences. Forget fines. This was personal now. Caleb looked out the kitchen window at the ram standing peacefully in the shade, his horns tipped slightly forward, head low, eyes calm. The calm before the storm. "They're not touching you," Caleb muttered. "Not while I'm still breathing." He scanned the letter again. It cited unauthorized livestock, aggressive behavior, and community endangerment. There would be a formal inspection in 72 hours. If Muffin was deemed a threat, animal control would remove him by force. Caleb sat down, opened his laptop, and began typing. By the time the sun dipped below the rooftops, the plan was in motion. The next morning, Caleb made a dozen calls. He contacted a local animal rights attorney, then a small-time YouTuber known for exposing HOA abuses, then the Morning Herald, who had already run a fluff piece on Muffin that week titled, "Horned Hero or Hooligan." But the biggest surprise came from the neighborhood itself. People started showing up. Rob from down the street knocked on his door holding a thermos and a stack of papers. "I pulled every HOA clause from the last 10 years. Found 4 contradictions in the livestock regulations alone." Sandy showed up with a lawn chair and a thermos full of iced tea. "I'm staying here. If they want Muffin, they're going through me." By noon, 5 more neighbors had joined, setting up folding chairs and forming what one of them called the Pasture Patrol. Muffin, now basking in the shade like royalty, chewed thoughtfully on his alfalfa treats, while children drew his likeness in chalk on the driveway. But the real kicker came at 3:47 p.m., when a white van pulled up, and a woman in a navy blue pantsuit stepped out with purpose in her heels. She was from the county animal control office. "Hi," she said, holding up her ID. "I'm here to do a safety assessment." Caleb stepped out calmly. "You're welcome to observe. Just don't wear khakis." She blinked, confused. "Sorry?" A neighbor leaned over and whispered, "Long story." The inspection lasted 40 minutes. The agent observed Muffin in his fenced enclosure, reviewed Caleb's permits, checked the footage of Gregory's backyard trespass. Caleb had smartly installed a security camera after the drone incident, and finally, spoke to the neighbors. Each one testified. Muffin had never left the yard. Muffin had never caused harm to anyone who didn't provoke him, and most importantly, Gregory had entered the property illegally. The woman returned to the gate, folded her notebook, and said with finality, "This animal is not aggressive. He's territorial and well contained." Caleb exhaled slowly. "So he's not being removed?" "No. There's no violation here. In fact," she paused, "I'll be filing a report on the HOA's conduct. Trespassing is a legal matter, not a zoning issue." The neighbors cheered. Someone passed Muffin a celebratory apple, but Caleb's smile faded the second he spotted a familiar figure lurking across the street. Gregory stood beside a dark sedan, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching. He hadn't come to win the legal battle. He was waiting for Caleb to let his guard down. As the animal control officer drove away and the neighbors high-fived each other, Gregory slipped quietly into the passenger seat of the car and vanished down the road. The next morning, Caleb would wake up to find something far more sinister than a letter. The next morning, something felt off. The air was heavy, not just with the scent of rain, but with a strange, expectant silence. Caleb stood in his kitchen, sipping his coffee, eyes fixed on the backyard. Muffin was missing from his usual spot beneath the oak tree. His stomach sank. He dropped the mug into the sink and bolted for the back door. "Muffin," he called. There was no answer. The gate was open. Not ajar. Wide open. The latch had been snapped, as if someone had kicked it clean off. The neighbors hadn't arrived yet. No pasture patrol. No kids with chalk. Just the sound of his own heartbeat thudding in his ears. He called again, louder this time. "Muffin." And then he heard it. A loud metallic clang, followed by a muffled shout, coming from the other side of the property, behind the shed. Caleb sprinted through the grass, slipping in the morning dew, and turned the corner just in time to see a man scrambling backward across the mud. Gregory. He was covered in scratches. His pants were torn at the knee. And there, standing protectively between Caleb and the HOA president, was Muffin, horns lowered, breath heavy, eyes locked on his target like a sentinel. "You broke into my yard," Caleb yelled, barely believing what he was seeing. Gregory didn't respond. He looked dazed, crawling toward a duffel bag half submerged in mud. Caleb got there first. He yanked the bag open. Inside were a pair of bolt cutters, a spool of nylon rope, and most disturbing of all, a tranquilizer gun. His stomach turned. "You were going to take him," Caleb whispered, shaking with disbelief. "I was protecting the neighborhood." Gregory spat. "He's dangerous. You don't know what he's capable of. He's a ram, not a war criminal." Gregory pushed himself to his feet, covered in muck, eyes wild. "You think this is over? I am the HOA. I am the rules." Behind Caleb, more footsteps approached, neighbors drawn by the shouting. Rob, Sandy, 2 others, all pausing as they took in the scene. Gregory mud-drenched and flailing, Muffin standing tall, and Caleb with a duffel bag full of felonies. "You are going to sedate a resident's animal and remove it illegally?" Rob asked, incredulous. "I was restoring order," Gregory snapped, then jabbed a finger at Muffin. "That thing is a menace. He attacked me." "You trespassed on his turf," Sandy muttered. "Honestly, I'm amazed he didn't file a police report." Gregory's face flushed beet red. "I will be pressing charges." "Oh, don't worry," Caleb said, reaching for his phone. "So will I." He pulled up the live feed from the backyard camera he'd repositioned the night before. It had caught everything. Gregory creeping through the fence line, snapping the gate, and attempting to rope Muffin like some suburban cowboy. The neighbors watched, mouths agape. Then Rob chuckled. "Guess the ram's not the only one with horns around here." Gregory took a step back, but Muffin stepped forward. It was a subtle move, but it was enough. Gregory turned and ran, slipping twice before launching himself over the hedge, arms flailing like a man pursued by justice itself. Muffin didn't chase him this time. He didn't need to. He'd already won. That afternoon, Caleb filed a police report. The duffel bag was handed over as evidence. The footage was saved and sent to the authorities. By sunset, Gregory was suspended from his position as HOA president pending investigation. But Caleb knew it wasn't over. There was still the final meeting to come, the one that would determine Muffin's future and expose Gregory's deepest secret. The day of the final HOA hearing arrived like an inevitable storm. Caleb had spent the last few days preparing, not only with legal advice, but by gathering his neighbors. They were all there, Rob, Sandy, even the kids who had drawn Muffin's likeness in chalk, sitting in the front row of the HOA clubhouse, ready to witness the final blow to Gregory's reign. But Caleb wasn't just here to defend Muffin. He was here to finish what had started. As he stepped inside the room, he saw Gregory seated at the head of the table, still wearing that smug expression, though the damage was obvious. His clothes were fresh, but the dark circles under his eyes and the bitter tension in his shoulders told the real story. The tranquilizer gun incident had already made waves online, and Caleb knew Gregory was trying to maintain control, but he was teetering on the edge of losing everything. The room was tense, filled with HOA members and concerned residents. One by one, the board members tried to get the meeting under control. It was clear Gregory had expected a smooth, orderly session. What he hadn't anticipated was the silent army of neighbors who had shown up to watch him crumble. Caleb stood at the podium, calm but resolute, as the board chairman called the meeting to order. "Mr. Turner," the chairman began, glancing at the papers in front of him. "We're here to address the matter of the complaint filed by Gregory Darnell regarding the continued presence of the livestock, specifically the ram." Caleb nodded, his eyes locking with Gregory's for the first time in days. "Thank you. I'd like to start by saying that Muffin is not the problem. The problem is a man who thinks he can break into someone's property, trespass, and illegally try to take their property without the consent of the authorities. The room murmured, the board members exchanging uncertain glances. Gregory shot up, ready to defend himself. This is a travesty. This ram has endangered the entire community. Save it, Gregory. Caleb interrupted. We've all seen the footage of you creeping into my yard, armed with bolt cutters and a tranquilizer gun. That's not protecting anyone. That's kidnapping. The room went quiet. I've provided evidence to animal control, the police, and the HOA board. Gregory Darnell, our esteemed president, was the one who violated every rule in the HOA handbook, and in doing so, he made this personal. Caleb hit play on his phone, and the video from the backyard camera filled the room's projector. The footage showed Gregory sneaking through the gate, his face twisted in a mix of malice and arrogance. The crowd watched as Muffin gave chase, and the infamous tackle sent Gregory flying into the mud. But then Caleb did something unexpected. He paused the footage. You see, Caleb said, his voice low but sharp, I'm not just here to save Muffin. I'm here to show that we don't need to live in fear of people like Gregory. People who think they can control us with fines and intimidation. Gregory fidgeted, his face growing redder by the second. You're lying, he hissed. This is all a setup. No, Gregory, Caleb said coolly. You've been exposed. And the real kicker? You've been exploiting your position as HOA president for years, leveraging it to get rid of neighbors you don't like, making sure you stay in power, and threatening anyone who didn't comply with your rules. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Sandy raised her hand. I have something to add, she said, standing up. Sandy pointed to Gregory. You see, Gregory tried to fine me for planting flowers in my own garden last year. When I refused, he started sending threats about property devaluation, and just last week, he tried to fine me again for a tree branch that hung slightly over the sidewalk. He's not the hero he thinks he is. One by one, the other neighbors added their own complaints, stories of fines, harassment, and intimidation. The room became a chorus of voices, all speaking out against the man who had been the HOA president for far too long. Gregory stood frozen, his face twisted in rage and shame. Then, just as it seemed like Gregory would shout back, one of the board members stood up. This has gone on long enough. We will be suspending your position as HOA president, effective immediately, and we will be conducting a full review of your actions. If there's enough evidence, we will be recommending legal action against you. Gregory's face drained of color. The room erupted into applause. As the meeting concluded, the members filed out, some shaking Caleb's hand, others patting Muffin's head in admiration. The fight wasn't just over, it had been won. But just as Caleb turned to leave, a final twist caught him off guard. The chairman approached him, a mysterious smile playing at the corner of his mouth. You know, Mr. Turner, the chairman said, we're actually thinking of revising the HOA rules, perhaps adding a new clause, something about livestock protection. Caleb blinked. Really? Really? The chairman replied. We'd be honored to have you serve on the board. Caleb smiled. I'll think about it. But as he walked out, Muffin by his side, he couldn't help but chuckle. Some fights, it seemed, had unexpected rewards. And as for Gregory, well, he'd gotten a taste of real justice, just not the kind he'd expected.